for our listeners, viewers, etc. today, this is Paul Stevenson and David Sax. David Sax is an international best-selling entrepreneur. I think, is it fair to say, reporter and culture coach? Is that something that you'd stand for?
No one's ever called me a culture coach.
But I think there's somewhere on the.
It must be the tracksuit I'm wearing.
Yeah, I think it really works.
Let's go culture.
Yeah, let's go culture. So I think that today, I mean, well, firstly, it's a pleasure. I take it you're in Canada, is that right?
Yes, the trees gave it away, I assume, in the background. Yes, I'm based in Toronto. Now I'm about 2 hours northwest of Toronto in my blessed COVID exile, but we'll be headed back this week as the children start school and I assume finish it a week later. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, so really it is about the book. It's about what you stand for, sort of with a bigger mission, because Ben and I, we came together with Zengility to liberate the world from work last year. And in January, found ourselves in a situation as we were pointing towards this pandemic that, our focus was really to get, people to really consider their options when working for corporations. So just reeling up to that was, we felt that, over the last 50 years, a lot of people have actually been, serving the corporate system. And in reality, sort of, a big proportion of their skills are redundant and, all that sort of classic career stuff we felt was coming to an end, and people were looking for more choice, money and time and looking for ways of actually deploying their skills. So in January this year, we thought, well, yeah, we're going to be, market making. And then come, March, April time, the market's made. All of a sudden, things have changed. And then in comes the book. And we thought, wow, there's some serious synergies here, between us. And I think that, a lot of what you express in the book with that pace of energy, it kind of gets you moving, it gets you really excited. And I was, as we were going through the chapters and reading the material and the different sort of interviews and businesses and scenarios, we just thought, well, this is absolutely amazing. And it's kind of like a foundation for us to sort of really springboard off with. One, SilentEgo, the podcast, but secondly, the Zengility business model that we're actually championing for budding entrepreneurs or people that are actually up against it with things like redundancy. The best might be yet to come. So we're sort of saying, redundancy might be the release you need to dig deep, to say, now's the time to sort of start really reaching out and, creating that business venture that has laid dormant inside you for such a long time. Because, we felt that, conventional employment, it has its place and it is what it is. But from a human point of view, given where we are right now, I think it's time for people to really dig deep and look at new ways of actually working, living. And our previous podcast, David, just to bring you up to speed, was all about the rise of the family business. Because I think COVID has got us all talking indoors about how we're all going to see ourselves through this. So we're all about the new world of work, and we're all about associating with, the David Saxes of the world that are writing incredibly high energy books and material to support that cause. And so we're on a mission. And, that's kind of like a big roundabout way of saying, hi, you're welcome, and let's get together.
Hi, Paul. That's great. Yeah. I think it's great. I mean, it's, as you're saying this, the new world of work, family businesses, people working independently, it calls up to mind your great countryman, Roger Daltrey, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I mean, it's fascinating how we normalized this conception of work as a sort of stable, long-term employment in a corporate structure, which that's really the way that people have worked for about a century, maybe a little bit more. I mean, after the Industrial Revolution, for most of human history, people have been independent. They've worked in family businesses. They've had trades. They've had their own businesses. And in most parts of the world, that's how people work as well. But I think in sort of the Western world or the wealthier world, countries of the world, like the UK and Canada, the United States, Europe, you know, there is this stigmatization that really happened around entrepreneurship, it's this sort of catch-22, because about 10%, let's say, of people in the US or in Canada or in the UK work for themselves, or are entrepreneurs in some sense of the word. And that tends to correlate with, employment numbers, GDP, economic growth. The reality is when times are good and there's lots of jobs, more people will take that secure job with the pension and the retirement and the benefits and just the stability of getting that paycheck every 2 weeks. But what we've seen is that when times are bad, when we enter recessions or economic crisis, there's a rise, often out of necessity, of people having to do their own thing or wanting to do their own thing. And I think what we've seen this year, and it was interesting because the book came out in the middle of April, which is, don't release a book in the middle of a pandemic. It's a terrible idea from a business perspective. But from a topical perspective, it was really interesting because you were seeing the largest job losses, the highest rates of unemployment, businesses closing everywhere. I mean, you just walk down the street of any city or town anywhere, and you would see these places that were the lifeblood economically, culturally, socially of your community boarded up, and you didn't know which would reopen. And we're seeing that many of them are not. Suddenly there were a lot of people that were looking quickly to figure out what they could do, and applying for another job was not a likely scenario in an era of 15, 20% unemployment. And so it's made a lot of people think about entrepreneurship in a much more basic way, I'd like to say, because I think what I talk about in the book is that the entrepreneur over the past decades, and especially around the way that it's been portrayed and glamorized through Silicon Valley and the successes of Zuckerberg and Jobs and Musk, had become this exalted figure, the sort of superstar of business, this Ayn Randian godlike figure, where in reality it's anyone who works for themselves, right? And I think we're seeing people recapture that, both in terms of their economic activity, but also in terms of the importance of that type of entrepreneur, of every type of entrepreneur, for a broader reasons of our society.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's sort of, so coming into the corporate piece, a lot of people, what we're experiencing right now is there's definitely an appetite, but it's sort of getting people, from our point of view, getting them to the table. And I think the corporation, in some respects, has served a lot of people really well. But there's also that degree of learned helplessness through that sort of, I suppose it's always there. I think what we're faced with now, it's not going to be there. So therefore, you're left with limited choice. But we're championing choice many times. So it's all about mindset. And it's something we said at the beginning of the year. This is back in January when we thought we were market making. And there's lots of really good, cool overlaps here, that we said that the currency of the 21st century is the way you think. And that thinking now is, household coming back to family businesses and, pardon the term, but your wife goes one way, you go the other. Now we're all back in there. Another statement we made, I mean, we're good on metaphors and lots of good coinage over here, I've got to say, but we're saying we're born to create, not work. And I think what we're going to see is this surge of new world entrepreneurship that is harnessing that, the choices of life, the money and time, and we call it the new rich. And the new rich it's not all about the cash. And I think you express that in the book in so many different ways that, like me personally, I've been an entrepreneur since around 96. And, the ideas, you touch on the kind of the part madness, this inner energy that just is relentless. It won't leave you. I think more people now are going to start discovering that through maybe different experiences of anxiety, stress maybe. But I think that's where we have a part to play, is helping people channel that energy. Because, reading and listening to the book, David, I had to be really choiceful about when I listened to it. So it was at the end of the day, it used to rev me up. So I have to sort of like say it's a morning book because it was very inspirational, and it kind of like you found your heartbeat going up with a lot of the sort of stories and anecdotes and insights. It had a life to it. And, I think it's, I would always recommend that people read that because it's sort of, it does give you in some respects, may give you a dose of fear, but equally you say, well, actually, I'm going through that. I feel that stuff. It's now time to release it. So I think, your point's well made, and I think that I think we now, I suppose where we're going is we're on the precipice of the world of work has changed. Have you? So I think the emphasis now is on the individual to really dig deep and not necessarily plan to survive, but look beyond that and think, what is the essence of me? So it comes back to the word that really did hone in was soul, the communication of the unseen one within the person that is this life energy that it really does come out in so many different ways.
Well, I'm glad it struck you in that way. I'm glad you were able to sit through 11 hours of me talking as well. That's
right. I think it's that's really good. But I think the challenges are, for as much as I know we're coming at it from, the new world of work and the entrepreneur, that using that word, and you said it, I think, of recent, that there are different ways to express your value as a human, in the context of work. And it doesn't have to be, what's your views on that? I mean, obviously,
I think what we sort of lost sight of over the past couple decades, and again, a lot of this is driven by that narrative of a specific type of entrepreneurship, which we associate with Silicon Valley, is that an entrepreneur is X, and we have a definition, which is, a hard-driven type A winner by all means, brilliant genius who just wants to grow and make as much money as possible and win, or quote unquote change the world. And they are driven to succeed, and they are driven to work, and everything that gets in their way, whether it's, the people they work with or people they don't like or ideas they disagree with or their family, which is taking up too much time, has to be pushed aside in order to reach this pinnacle, this Everest of success and achievement, right? Becoming this sort of capitalist superhero. And, think of Elon Musk and the divorces he's churned through and everybody who he burns in his way, and flaunting rules of closing down his factory during the pandemic because it would impact him. And, to his fans, the Musketeers, I mean, that's what makes him a hero. But to say that that's what defines an entrepreneur singularly is false. Entrepreneurship encompasses the spectrum of humanity in all its beautiful diversity. And that's a cultural diversity. There are far more entrepreneurs who are Black women in places like the UK or the US or Canada than there are sort of, white males that went to Cambridge or Harvard or any other sort of high-end school. There are far more entrepreneurs who are women that are single mothers on average. Their average entrepreneur might be working in a family business or a small business. And I think the motivations of every entrepreneur is defined by who they are, right? For me, as someone who's always worked for himself, as a writer, as a journalist, as a speaker, as a, what did you say? Creative? I don't know. Something beautiful, which I'll totally forget.
Culture coach.
Culture coach. Yes. A lot of it's defined by my freedom, the freedom to be able to work with the ideas that I want to work with and not have to deal with the stuff that I don't, which over my course of my career, I've been fortunate enough to be able to do and get in that position. And also the freedom to decide when not to work. I mean, it's September 9th right now, and I have not done a lick of work since the end of June because my kids finished school or homeschool, whatever the hell it was called this year, just yelling at a computer basically. And we didn't have childcare this summer because of the pandemic. And I was like, you know what? I finished with my book. I don't have another one I'm working on. My speaking gigs are not happening because no one's traveling. I have enough money in the bank. I'm going to just take this summer and actually be with the kids and make the most out of it. And that's what I did. And my friends who have their jobs, they're like, well, that must be nice. I'm like, yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. Like we hiked every day. We swam every day. We went on adventures. I mean, that was the freedom that I had. I sacrificed the money I could have made over these couple months, but to me, that was a value. That doesn't fit into this, when someone's studying entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School or the Said Business School in Oxford, they're not talking about that, right? That's not something there. It's like how to build a business and scale it, make it as maximum as possible, take as much funding, make as much money. But most entrepreneurs don't want to do that. They want to have a lifestyle. They want to be able to control over their own destiny. They might want to do something that fits in with their community or allows them to rebuild a life. They have all these other motivations that are intrinsically human, non-economic motivations and values that we have forgotten about when we talk about entrepreneurship. And so I think what you're talking about here is that, right? Is realizing that, you spend the majority of your waking life working. And for most people, they don't think about the satisfaction that they derive from that aside from the pay and the benefits. My wife is a career coach, so she's actually a culture coach. And LaurenMalekcoaching.com. And the clients she sees are often people who are very successful in their careers, and yet they are wanting something. They want something beyond the material goods or the sort of economic benefits that the work has. And she helps them find that, right? And I think what you're tapping into is that same desire of people who want to work, who want to be productive, who want to create, who want to make a living and support themselves, but also want something greater. And I think entrepreneurship provides that in a very specific way.
I think it's incredibly well said, and thank you, David. That's expressed in a very art form, and I think we coined the phrase here, life capitalism. It's the new rich. So we're not saying that capitalism hasn't had its place, but it's come at a price, right? And we all know what we're going through right now, and it's reshaping itself. And we're saying, hey, you've got those sort of rock star sort of entrepreneurs, which, we share the same view, to be candid. And we also think that, the world of work has given us, in some respects, that sense of belonging and that status anxiety. But in the heart, when we look at the heart of the issue and the people we are communicating with now, they're all saying, I kind of feel there is a better way, but I just need the help. And hence why we've set up our professional services business to fundamentally produce entrepreneurs from that, what is like that dormant talent that is always sat there that just needs bringing to the surface. So that's the mission. And then, operating on choice, money, time, which is the principles of that freedom of, we work 3 days a week, 10 months of the year, but you know what? There are the days when you're working 7 days a week, almost round the clock, because something's got a grip of you and it's back, so it's the way it is. And I think, there's something.
But you're choosing to. I think that's the difference, right?
Yes.
You're choosing to, where it's not like, Paul, come on.
Yeah.
I was clocking those hours and you came in at 9:07 today. And, the workday starts at 9:00.
Well, that's interesting because we coined in a phrase, you're absolutely spot on. It's that sort of work expands to fill the day as well. So if we look at the psychology of work, how it's changing, it is leading up to the, we call it cyber time, where you're using 3 or 4 hours a day to do what you need to do with heart. So, you're really on purpose. You get an awful lot more done. And I think, that's the sort of the coinage we're, using to sort of help, create the stimulus for people to come and talk to us about, you know what, I want some of what you guys have got. And fine, well, you've got it. You're just not accessing it. Now, come on, let's educate you on how to get that sort of, that bakery open, or that, hair salon, or, what you've always wanted to do it, but we're afraid to reach out. And, you don't have to go to a venture capitalist and, put everything on the line. You can do things in very smart, efficient ways with the cash that's required to set yourself up as a sole trader. And coming back to the corporation, when I've spoken to people over the years, particularly VPs and CEOs, everybody was chasing results that nobody wanted. And that's a common pattern, and it was just bizarre. And then, so you've got, when they come out of it, it's almost like a sense of relief. It's a release, and that sort of what I would call tortured soul begins to flourish, in the right environment. So if we look at the human element, we call it the force of nature. And I think right now we're on the precipice of that force of nature. So if I look at what is going on in the planet, all these people being released, in one capacity or another, we've got to access that deep depth of force of nature and release that, if we call it the entrepreneur, that entrepreneurial flair and that freedom of spirit to actually, acclimatize, adjust, and reinvent ourselves, but on our terms, yeah, and not go down that sort of classic capitalistic route. You don't have to. And I think that's where the kind of propaganda of status has sort of got to start to take a back seat. It's not about, the classic sort of, we can go back to Edward Bernays and all that sort of stuff back in the early days of propaganda. There's a little bit of a smell of that right now, isn't there, kicking around? Which way's up? Nobody knows which way's up at the minute. But I think also, tapping into the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur, I believe, is in everybody. It's an instinct. It's built into humanity. And I think the few can sort of access it, but I believe the majority can access it. We all have it. We just need to give ourselves a chance to kind of release that sort of that energy, that creativity, those ideas, and form them and move them into what I would call commercial reality. Which brings me on to the subject of money. When is enough enough? And I think we're possibly going to be living in times where it's about measuring ourselves appropriately of what we don't want versus what we want. And I don't know about you, David, but I'm living in that world now where through certain sort of constraints and things like that, I've learned to recycle my cash. And right now, we're having a podcast, and that's come out of my holiday money. It's kind of like, recycling the money in a different way. And it's kind of good fun to think like that.
You already live by the ocean.
So. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we've got to say we are privileged, yeah, so from that perspective. But to be candid, that's a choice that was made 10 years ago to move away from the hub to get to nature, which was the ocean, the beach, the free things that mean a lot. And, my business partner, Ben, knows, we're up at 4:00 in the morning and the first ritual is a coffee, It wakens the soul and off you go. You're on with your day. But no, I mean, I think, question, how are you going to see have you got another book in your mind coming that's...
It's interesting. I had a couple ideas that I was working on prior to this. One of them for like a year, but the pandemic sort of made it impossible to do. And I sort of came to that realization. Just would have been impossible to go and sort of do any of the research or do any of the stuff because it was all tied to live performance. And so I think, as an entrepreneur, sometimes you work on an idea for a while. And I know people who are working on restaurants and other businesses right before this happened, and they had to let go because at a certain point, you could say, oh, you could fight all you want. And a real entrepreneur never gives up. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, this does not make sense now. And recently I've come around to some other ideas around time spent outdoors because I've done so much of that this summer that is now forming itself into idea for the next possible thing. So we'll see what comes of it. I mean, it's an exciting time because everything just seems open. There's all sorts of possibilities out there. But I can't rely on the things that worked before. And so it'll be interesting as I go back to the world of work next week, once my kids are out of the house, to dive back into that and sort of tap into that entrepreneurial energy that I have, but it's not a constant round the clock thing. It comes in the waves as the ideas come, as the cycles of business or the cycles of ideas sort of work through me. So I'm excited about that, but of course, somewhat fearful as well, because it's unknown, it's uncertain. I have not had a paycheck, and nobody gives me a regular paycheck in a while. And so, I'm clicking on that bank balance. I'm like, okay, I'm okay for this period of time.
Yeah.
Better get something cooking soon.
Well, it's interesting, just touching on that subject, David, because we've managed to manage the anxiety of cash by turning it into a utility. So we're saying the relationship with money, we're seeing that changing, and it's the battery, isn't it? We've all got the battery, the bank, and we're drawing down on it. So we're seeing it as we all know, digital currency is going to kick in at some point, and utility, so money is now becoming a utility. So the relationship with money is changing. That's how we think about it. And that's just because that's our way of managing the anxiety of, seeing it dropping down the battery.
It's fine. Once the Bitcoin comes up, we'll be fine. Don't worry about this cash.
There's some more on the way. Cash. It's fine. It'll come along,
Save us, Satoshi.
Yeah. Exactly. So, but, I think it's important. I mean, we do need to sort of keep the battery charged and, stay healthy. But I think that sort of, like you say, if one idea doesn't work, you move and you switch to another one. And there's numbers of ways of revenue streaming, sort of you've got multiple. So coming back just to sort of talk a little, just to touch on the portfolio worker. I mean, we're all smart enough to know that you can't rely on one thing. You've got to have like 3 or 4 other things moving along. And I think that sort of, I would call it the 21st century entrepreneur is the one that's got the 4 or 5 revenue streams coming in to charge the battery, and then obviously live life in the appropriate ways. And I think that it does come back to that life capitalism, which is life first, cash second. And you've really expressed that today with how you're going about things. So I think it's fair to say that nature is our chief executive at the minute.
Has always been. We just forgot that they were up there in the corner office.
Yeah.
More like the chairman of the board, really.
Yeah.
They only come in when times are difficult.
Well, do you know what? Just to sort of, zeroing in to as we come to a conclusion here. Last 2 years ago, I did business with a great Canadian company called Outdoorsy. Who they have a platform all around RV hire. So it's
interesting.
It's the equivalent of Airbnb but for RVs.
Oh, cool.
And
I'd love to be connected with them. As a side note, for what I'm researching. Yeah,
sure thing. Yeah, we'll loop you up on that. But Evan Hopkins is the VP of International Sales, and we helped him scale out across predominantly Europe. But it's a great concept, and it's all about the great outdoors and rental RVs. So talk about getting your timing right with obviously air flights and things sort of being grounded. I'm sure they've had a flourishing time over the last.
Oh, it's been an explosive year in those sorts of businesses, and that's the thing. I mean, you're seeing people who may have had a particular business, may have had a particular idea, and what you're seeing is that innovation of entrepreneurship doesn't mean you're reinventing the wheel, but sometimes it's like, okay, this isn't happening. What do people need? They need food delivery. Done. We're going to do that. Or we're taking this fine dining restaurant. We're going to make fried chicken sandwiches because that's what people want. You're seeing what you're seeing out there. Yes, you're seeing companies doing huge deals and closing huge rounds and having tremendous successes. But what you're also seeing is sort of this local day-to-day entrepreneurial ingenuity. That's that sort of creativity being the mother of invention. And I think what it's helped people do, and I hope what comes away from this time is I hope that it helps people rediscover the sort of the essence, the soul of entrepreneurship, because it really is 2 things that every entrepreneur has, regardless of business or their finances or success or background. And it's freedom and risk, right? The freedom to do the thing that they want to do, to work in the way they want to work, to sort of peg it to their values, to decide when and how they work and what they're going to do, and take that idea and run with it however they want, because nobody's standing over them telling them they can or can't. and the risk that comes along with that, the financial risk, fiat currency, the risk in time, the risk to reputation. I think also just that emotional risk that comes with, attaching yourself to that idea, and riding the ups and downs of it. But I think, like any freedom, it comes with risk, and people are loath to give it up once they taste it. And so it'll be interesting to see if the people who have gone into entrepreneurship out of necessity, perhaps after becoming redundant or losing their job or seeing another business sort of close up due to the circumstances of what's gone on with lockdowns and markets changing, how people, what happens when they discover that freedom and get a taste of it, and how that might shift work in a broader way, in the way that you're talking about.
Definitely. And I think it's very human, and it's a big test without question. So anyway, listen, I digress. David, I think we've had a really high paced, I don't know how long, half an hour. It's been amazing to talk to you, and you can feel your energy. The book is fantastic. We're going to recommend everybody reads it, because basically it's got a pulse, and it basically means an awful lot. So you've got your kindred spirits here. So fantastic.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Good luck with the podcast, and with the rest of it. I mean, again, we're all just running one big experiment on our own lives, but it's the process that gets us through it, and we should find just joy in the moments.
Brilliant. It's a pleasure. Yeah. Take care.
Yeah.
And be brilliant. Be brilliant. Take care.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.